give or take 6 months on either end. We are often stunned when our partner hurts us in ways that are familiar to us, but we also pick them because they had that ability, and it can be an opportunity to heal, or sometimes it's just an unhealthy choice.
Right. Like it's basically playing into the way that you not really feel about yourself, but like what you know, like that's what you know as a child. And therefore, this feels right, even though it's so wrong because it's what you know.
Exactly. There's this thing in psychology called repetition compulsion.
Uh-huh. I was going to
And
say that, but not,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And it's this concept for your listeners who haven't heard of this, that our unconscious mind doesn't know the difference between past, present, and future. So we seek to heal old wounds in current time. So we pick people who have the same traits. And like, if you sit down and you make a list, if you're in a relationship of each of your parents' best traits and worst traits, and your partner's best traits and worst traits, you're likely to see a lot of overlap. And what happens is we pick people who are familiar to us. And let's say you had a parent, let's say it wasn't that you were terribly abused, but let's say you had a dad who was a workaholic who was just emotionally unavailable. You're likely to pick a partner who's emotionally unavailable in some way. And it may not be the exact same way. They may be an alcoholic. They may be a gambler. They may just be emotionally unavailable. And then what happens when you get past that honeymoon period, and keep in mind that as children are egocentric. And what that means is it's not narcissism, because kids are supposed to think everything's about them. If dad is not available, it must be something I did. I must not be lovable. I must not be fill in the blank enough. If only I was a better kid, got better grades, was better behaved, whatever it is, dad would want to be with me and love me. So we pick a partner who recreates this. And then that little child in us goes, dad was right. But if I can make him love me, if I can make him show up for me, it will prove that dad is wrong. And this is an unconscious process. And
Right.
then what happens is typically we pick someone, but we can't change them. It's an unusual situation when they actually want to change. And sometimes we hit the jackpot and they do, but more of the time they don't. And then we not only feel the wound of the partner letting us down, but that old childhood wound is activated. So our reaction to it is way bigger than it would have been. Anytime we have a reaction that's out of proportion to the event, we always have to look at our childhood.
That makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
What about when, and of course, like a lot of people know you now. I mean, they knew you before, but you were on the last season of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. You're working with Erika Jayne. This question is not related to her, but it could be just in general, like when there's a couple where there's like such a vast difference in money, one partner has so much more money. Like, money is
Yep.
something partners fight about. How do you go about advising people with that? I mean, one's just really successful and you fell in love and here we are.
Well, money is power. And in any relationship, we all have things that we bring to the table that are valuable. And the person who has the money, typically in most relationships that I see, they set the rules. And there are a lot of people who look at these super wealthy spouses and relationships and go, oh, I wish I had that. But everybody pays a price. And most people don't realize what that price is. And interesting, if you look at the history of the Housewives of Beverly Hills, there have been a lot of divorces on that show. And I believe that one of the things historically that has happened is that originally the show was the Housewives of Beverly Hills. It was all women who had super successful husbands, and they were not as known, and they were housewives. And now, granted, over the course of time, some of that's changed. A lot of women are coming to the show with their own careers, their own businesses, their own products, all that sort of stuff. But originally, that was the premise of the show. And what was happening that I saw is that these women were becoming more and more well known. They were getting money of their own. In addition to the paycheck of the show, they also were getting deals, endorsement deals, and other opportunities, which changed their financial situation. It takes a very strong couple to be able to negotiate that shift in power in a relationship. And a lot of couples were not able to survive it because when that relationship dynamic changed, so much changed that they weren't able to recover.
Do you think that's why, like, I had someone on this podcast, Vicky Gumbelson. I don't know if you know her. She's from the Orange County Housewives. Like, she said on this podcast years ago, like, she thinks she would still be married to her first husband, like, if it wasn't for the show. Like, do you think that's a real thing? And is it for the reasons you just said? Or, I mean, you could, or is it like a strong marriage will survive? I mean, it can't be easy for a marriage to be on reality TV.
It is not easy for marriage to be on reality TV. It is not only is it the change of dynamics of one person now being elevated in a way that was not necessarily expected when they signed on for the marriage. Because look, all marriages, all relationships have unspoken agreements. And typically in a marriage where one person has a lot of money and the other person doesn't, there's an unspoken agreement of like, you're going to be my cheerleader, you're going to be my support staff, you're going to be there for me when I need to be lifted up. And that's a beautiful thing in a marriage. And hopefully both people do that for each other. But there's more of a sense when one person has a demanding career and that career supporting the whole family. But then what starts to happen is the other person has these demands on them and they have their stresses and they have this whole other dynamic, and couples have to do work on themselves in the relationship to make that transition. Otherwise, it's unlikely. So I do think that what she said is probably true. Now, granted, you can't predict what might have happened had you not been on the show, that life would have thrown you, like, there are two paths and like she chose one. Who knows what the path would have been if her husband would have had an affair, if there would have been a terrible accident that changed that, like, who knows? You just don't know what stressors you might have encountered if things had gone differently. But look, I think that having a long-term marriage is incredibly challenging. It takes an enormous amount of work and dedication, but when you have roles that change this dramatically, it's extra challenging.
That makes a lot of sense. What about, I'm asking for a friend, of course, this wouldn't
Of
be
course.
me, but what about, if someone is single and they are just, loving life, they're good. I mean,
Yeah.
is that, I read somewhere like there's also a term for that if you're so happy being alone, like it's not like as good as you think all the time. Do you see any
Look,
red flags in that if someone's like, I'm very happy? Because I personally am very happy being single.
I look, I am a big believer that you cannot have a healthy relationship until you have experienced life alone and are satisfied and peaceful with it. Because in my experience as a therapist, and I've been doing this 3+ decades, it's the people who are scared to be alone who put up with shit in a relationship that they shouldn't. And then they're so terrified of being alone that they continue on in it when sometimes they shouldn't. I used to start every season of my show Couples Therapy, sitting the couples down saying, not